This is the Creative Market Free Goods Roundup for the week of October 26, 2015. There are 6 different free goods this week, but they are free this week only. So if you see something you like in this video, check out the description of this video where I'll place links to download each one of these 6 different free items. So first up here is Starshine Script. So this script font is provided in both OpenType as well as Web Font and Web Font 2 formats. So I have it opened up inside Illustrator here to show it. And this is actually a very popular style of script font that has a little bit thicker letters and a very brushed or painterly appearance to it. And as you can tell, it includes both uppercase letters as well as lowercase letters. So I'm going to zoom in on the lowercase letters a little bit so you can see the overall kind of texturing or distress that this particular peck has on it. So as you can see here, these letters have a very raggedy or distressed edge to them to give them that handmade or brushed look, and the uppercase letters are the same, although it's not quite as apparent as the lowercase letters. For the most part, much of the distressing on the uppercase versions are on the tips or the ends of the various letters. So I'll zoom down just a little bit here so you can see it includes all the numbers 0 through 9, as well as quite a few different special characters. So if I highlight over this and then go to type and then glyphs near the top here, you can see all the different special characters that are included. So it's not a huge assortment, but it should be enough for most applications that you're going to end up using this on, since you're probably going to be using this as a headline font or something a little bit larger. This probably wouldn't be an ideal font for long paragraphs anyways. So I went ahead and typed up Free Goods Roundup into a sentence so you can see how these letters look when they're actually used. So in my opinion, this looks really good. The kerning between all these letters looks perfect. Everything seems to connect quite well between all these different letters, and the spacing between the words looks pretty good as well. One thing I did note, if I go up to the top here, this is the default leading for this font, and I went ahead and shrunk it just a little bit up here so these would be a little bit closer together, but the default leading is pretty darn significant. And for reference, leading is basically the difference between the baseline of 2 different lines of words. So the bottom of the T to the bottom of the L, for example, on testing and then line. If you want to change the leading on this, you can just go ahead and go to Window and then Type and then make sure Character is selected. And from the Character window, you'll see an option with an A and then another A with a line going between the baseline of the 2 of them. If you hover over that, it'll say set the leading. So by default, that is usually set to auto, but if I make it something like 72, you can tell it brings these much closer together. And as long as this is highlighted, you can go ahead and use the arrow keys up or down to either increase or decrease the leading until you get it looking the way you want it to. It was so significant to begin with to prevent overlapping issues like how this S intersects with the dot on the I here and kind of clips that N just a little bit as well. So you might need to kind of customize this just a little bit and make sure little intersections like that don't happen unless that doesn't really bother you. But that's it for this font. I think this is a really good example of a handmade brushed looking script font. So if you think you'll have use for this either on a current project or something in the future, just be sure to grab it this week while it's still free. Next up is the Vintage Logo Bundle Volume 1. So this is a collection of 6 different vintage inspired logos in Adobe Illustrator format. So you are going to need Illustrator to use this, or at least a program that can take in .ai extension files. So I have this opened up to show. And something to note here, you might want to go ahead and check out the included text file that lists out all the fonts that you're going to need to use this pack. So go ahead and download all of those before you go ahead and then open this up and try to customize these. But all the type in this is live. So if I highlight over this and change this to be perhaps my own name, you can tell that it's very easy to go in here and customize these, and it really shouldn't take you very much time to do that. So I'm going to quickly go through the 6 different options here so you can see what is included. So overall, most of these are very clean and have a very simple style. And some of them, like this one right here, do have some additional icons included, like this knife and the fork icon, which if you're running a restaurant like this particular template is set out to match, then that might be a pretty useful thing for you to use. You don't even have to use these pre-made layouts. You could just use, for example, this particular set of icons if you're interested in just that. And this one has a little bit more of a modern kind of loosely illustrated feel, with the ink.co letters right here looking a little bit more hand-drawn or cartoony. And the same thing goes with this banner that's a little bit more of a loosely drawn, almost cartoonish style to it. So on this one in particular, I should note that all the fonts used in this are free, except there's a font called Franchise, which was a very popular free font that the author then made into a pay-only font. And I'll tell you that you can find it online for free still, although I don't know if that's really a legal thing to do. But if you search Franchise free font, you'll probably run into it, because this font was free for quite some time, and very recently that was pulled off of font sites like Font Squirrel and DaFont, where it used to be free on there but is no longer longer available. So I have a feeling if you want to use the franchise font, you should probably purchase it from the author, which if you search franchise font, you can go ahead and find. But this layout right here is very nicely done. It's very simple, and you can of course just pull things like this banner off to the bottom if you want to use just this banner, but you don't want to use this type on it. Or you can of course change the fonts used throughout any of these, or mix and match different elements from these different packs if you want to do that. So for example, I could select the knife and fork, hit Control-C on a PC or Command-C on a Mac to copy that, and then go in here and select this clock, delete it, and then hit Control-V on a PC or Command-V on a Mac to paste this in here, resize this to what I think is roughly appropriate, and then we have a slightly customized version of this to go ahead and use if you want to do that. And this is the last of the 6 different free layouts here, and this is a pretty cool one. I like the overall style of this. These swooshing marks right here look pretty nice, and they do a good job of kind of pulling this mark together. So that's it for this pack, and if you like these different logo layouts and you think it might have some use for them, just be sure to pick it up this week. Next up is Feathers Blue Pack. This is a pack of fairly realistic looking feathers in PNG format. So I have them inside Photoshop here to show them, and as you can tell, these also have a transparent background, so they should be really easy to use and kind of overlay on top of existing design work or typography, or even just overlay the feathers on top of each other if that's something you want to do. And for a rough estimate of size in these, if I go to image and then image size, this one is 1498 by 1668 pixels, so it's plenty big for pretty much anything on the web or most smaller print applications. The size will vary as you go through these different feathers just due to the general shape of them. And I'll zoom in a little bit closer on this feather so you can get a good idea of how it looks up close. Now I'm at 200%, so things look a little bit blurry, which isn't the case. These are all very high quality, but I want to get you a pretty good idea of how the actual illustration style looks. So it has almost a watercolory feel to me, while still pulling off a fairly realistic look. Like overall, this is a pretty darn realistic looking illustration of a feather, but it does have some kind of variations in the colors that remind me of a very realistically watercolor painted feather. So I'm going to go through the 8 different options here of different feathers so you can get a good idea of what to expect. So on this one in particular, you can start to see that watercolor effect a little bit more in some of the shading, which I think helps pull off the overall look of the feather pretty well. And as you can tell, they did go ahead and mask this out so it has a transparent background, which will make this super easy to use. And this feather in particular has a really pretty coloration, so you can also use these feathers as an inspiration point for different color combinations. Even if you don't want to use the feathers as feathers, you can use these to select colors from by using the eyedropper tool and just picking a point on there. The eyedropper tool is I on your keyboard as a shortcut if you didn't know that. So here's the next one. There's some pretty cool stuff happening in the blue section of this feather. This one also gives the impression of a slightly watercolored look, but there are some nice slight variations in color, like on this bottom section, that they could have easily just made a solid black, but instead there is some really nice color transitions going on here that adds a bit more depth when you look at it. And here's the next feather in a green tint. And here's another one that's a black and white feather, so this one's a little bit more subdued. And I could see a lot of these feathers working quite nicely with a handmade looking script font if you want to accent that, or use the feathers as a framing element. And here is the 7th feather right here, and this one right here is the last feather. And this one, like many of the other ones before, it has a really nice coloration pattern between the blues and the greens. And I think the illustration style does a nice job of finding a good balance between a very realistic looking feather while still having some style of the overall watercolor look. So if these feathers look useful to you and you have some projects in mind where they might come in helpful, just be sure to pick them up this week. Next up is Galo, a WordPress portfolio theme. This is a WordPress portfolio theme, so it's a pretty simple portfolio theme in that the main page is just a nice listing of all the different portfolio items that you have added. If you hover over the different items, you can tell it gives you a title for that particular item, so you can go ahead and set those to be whatever you want them to be, as well as overlaying a slight light color over the image that I'm sure you could change pretty easily if you wanted to. And at the very bottom here is a footer with some pretty tightly spaced social icons, and then a Powered by WordPress, as well as a link to the person who designed the theme. So if you actually click on one of these portfolio items, it'll bring you to that item's particular page where there's room for images up at the top here, as well as plenty of room for type below it. And then of course you can go back if you want to with a little link right here to kind of check out some previous items in the portfolio. So this is really a navigation between all the different items in the portfolio, either moving backwards or forwards, kind of depending on what you're doing. Up at the top here in the main navigation, you can see all the different things that you can go to. And one thing to note here, I think the white on this kind of a lighter yellow might not have quite enough contrast. So you might want to consider darkening this header just a tiny little bit to make these header links stand out, but they are perfectly legible as they are. That's kind of a personal preference thing. So I'm going to click on blog here so we can check out the blog. So on the left side here, there is an about me, social links, as well as an Instagram feed, a search bar, and then the archives of past posts. As you can see here, there are a bunch of different post types that will let you kind of go in and check out different things that you can do. So if I click on a post, it'll bring me to that post's particular page. In this case, it's a tiled image gallery, so you can kind of see how the images tile on this one. At the bottom here, there's room for type, and then you can go backwards and forwards between the different posts, as well as leave a reply in the comments section below. And up at the top here, there's a navigation link called Portfolio Grid. So this one is called Portfolio Grid 2, which if you click on that, you can tell it just as a 2x2 organizational structure of all the different possible portfolio posts. So if I do Portfolio Grid 4, it'll do it with 4 on each line, so that kind of makes sense. And then if you were to click on the Portfolio Grid 3, there would be 3 portfolio images on each one of these lines. So you can pick which one of those you think looks best. And I should also note that this is a fully responsive theme, so it's going to look pretty good no matter what kind of device you're looking at it on. And they also do a portfolio with sidebar, so if you want to have this sidebar right here, you can go ahead and use that option. When you're setting this up, you can kind of pick which one of these options you think will work best for you. They do full width pages as well, so here's an example full width page, as well as one with a right sidebar, and then there's one with no sidebar, and then there's an archive section as well. So if you want to go in and put an archive of all your old posts, you can go ahead and use this particular page. There's also a shortcodes page, and shortcodes are basically little code snippets that you can add in to cause certain things to happen. So in this one, it's a portfolio grid. This one right here is for adding drop caps if you want to go ahead and use those, as well as different columns and all the various kind of layout things that you might have use for when you're setting this up, including things like buttons with different colors, different button sizes, different button types, and then display types. So there's quite a few different shortcodes to go in here and use to custom style this up as you see fit. As you can tell as I'm scrolling down here, there really are a lot of different options, and keep note of all these different social media icons as well. There's a pretty darn good selection of them in here. So I'll just keep on going down until I hit the bottom and then zoom back up the top here by hitting this little arrow button and go to the contact page. So the contact page is very basic with a sidebar on the left here and then name, email, subject, and message with a little send button. So if people want to get in contact with you, it's a really easy way to go in there and do that. But that's it for this theme. If you liked what you saw and you think you might have some use for this, I think this is a pretty good example of a nice and straightforward portfolio theme on WordPress. Just be sure to download it this week while it's still free. Next we have watercolor stamp brushes. This is a collection of 15 different watercolor brushes for Photoshop, and they also include JPEGs as well as PNGs if you prefer to work that way. But I'm just going to use the built-in Photoshop brushes to go in and show these. And one quick way to install the Photoshop brushes is there's a .abr file included in the download. If you double-click that and then you hit B on your keyboard for brushes, and then click the down arrow on the brushes, you should see them installed here. Alternatively, you can click the down arrow for the brushes, go to this little gear cog icon up the top here, and then you want to go to the load brushes, and from there you can go ahead and go to the watercolor brushes download, select the .abr file and hit load, and then you should be good to go. But I've already got these loaded up here, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to click right here on one of these brushes so you can see how these look. And I should note these brushes are pretty darn big too. They're 2500 pixels on their longest side across the board, so it should be plenty big for most print or digital applications. Now I'm going to quickly kind of select another brush here and then overlay it on top of the one I made previously, just so you can get a good idea of how these look as you start to kind of overlay them. So as you can tell, there is a lot of transparency in these different watercolor brushes, which kind of makes sense for something like a watercolor brush. So you can make some really cool overlapping effects as you start to kind of layer these. And I'm just going to select the next one here and change the color to something like a blue, so you can see how it looks as you overlay a color like blue over a color like black. So right here you can start to see some of the interesting interactions as the blue goes over some of the darker spots that you can still see through this watercolor brush. And I'm going to keep on doing that on the bottom here. So I'm going to select a new one, go to this brush right here, which is kind of a really squiggly brush, and make this a blue. And then I'm going to click my fill right here and change it to something like a much more dark blue, and then go to a new brush, which I'm going to then overlay on top of it, so you can kind of see those interactions happening. So right here we have the light blue brush and then the much darker blue brush above it, which gives it this kind of neat layering effect as these overlap each other. But there's a nice selection of different watercolor brushes to go in here and use, so kind of experiment with all the different options and play around with things like like different colors and different overlaying patterns, so you can kind of see what makes the most sense or what looks the best as you go here and apply all of these. And you might even want to try doing something like making these on their own layers. So I can make this on its own layer, create another layer, and then select a different brush right here. Let's try one of these pretty big brushes just to kind of go over the top of this. So this is a pink on top of a pink, but since this one is on its own layer, this sort of stripe right here, I can select that layer, then hit Control U on a PC or Command U on a Mac, and then use the hue slider to kind of slide this around and very quickly get an idea of how different color interactions are going to look as I go through a few different options here of how these colors are overlapping. So a pretty cool pack of 15 different Photoshop brushes that are all pretty nice and large, and they also all have a very nice watercolor appearance. And do remember they do include JPEGs as well as PNGs as well. So if you don't have Photoshop, or if you prefer to use the JPEGs or PNGs, those options are certainly there for you to use. So if you thought these looked cool and you might have some use for them, just be sure to grab them this week while they're still free. And last up is Papers Pack Volume 1. So this is a collection of 15 different seamlessly repeating paper patterns, and they're provided in JPEG format, and they include both 72 dpi as well as 300 dpi versions. So I have the 300 dpi versions opened up here in Photoshop. And if I go to image and image size on these are 4000 by 4000 pixels. So this should be plenty big for pretty much anything on the web. And if you go ahead and repeat these out, they'll be big enough for anything on print as well. That's the cool thing about using a seamlessly repeating pattern. So I'll go ahead and zoom in really close on this so you can get a better idea of this paper's texture up close. So right now I'm at 100%, which you can tell there's a pretty nice but very subtle texture to this paper pattern. So if you're looking for paper patterns that aren't too in your face but will add just a little bit of texture to your work, this pack might be a pretty interesting thing to check out. And I should also note I just selected 5 at random here to go ahead and use, but there are 15 in total. So if you like these, you might want to pick up the pack just to check out everything that is included. But this should give you a pretty good idea of what to expect. So this is at 100% on this paper pattern. So this has a really cool combination of different diagonal kind of patterns going on this paper pattern, as well as some darker dots throughout that give this one just a little bit more character in comparison to a paper like the one I just showed previously. And here's the next one, which is a little bit of a darker pattern, and I'll zoom in to 100% on this one as well. So you can see there's lots of little white flecks in this one, and then some very subtle variations between the light and the dark portions of this paper that give it kind of a gradiated appearance to it. And this is a white paper pattern. So I'll go ahead and zoom in really close on this one as well so you can get a good idea of the overall texture of this particular paper pattern. And I'll go ahead and zoom back out here and show you a quick trick here if you want to make these whatever color you want them to be. At least with the white ones, it's super easy. Just double click on the background layer and then click OK, which will unlock it. And then go ahead and create a new layer by hitting the new layer button at the bottom here and just drag it below the paper texture above it. And click on that paper texture above it and change the blend mode from normal by clicking on the normal button right here and turn it to multiply. And then I'm going to go ahead and just select a color here on my color picker by clicking on the foreground color. Let's make it something like a light blue. And then I'm going to hit Alt backspace on a PC or Option backspace on a Mac. And as you can see, by setting this paper pattern that's white to multiply, it quickly overlays on the color that you placed below it. So if I hit Control U with the color layer selected and kind of transition through different hues here, you can see it automatically changes the color of this paper pattern to go ahead and match whatever color is below it. It does a really nice job of that. So if you're looking to create custom colors using a paper pattern, that's one way to do it. And this is the last one that I've selected. It's sort of a light blue color with a little bit of a gray in it. So I'll zoom in to 100% on this one once again so you can kind of see the pattern. I'll actually zoom in just a little bit closer so you can see there is that linear diagonal pattern with a little bit lighter flecks in it. And then there are some subtle differences between the color throughout this entire paper. So a lot of these papers are very, very subtle in their appearance, but it does a nice job of giving that little bit extra texture that you might be looking for if you think a standard solid color background might be a little bit too boring. And you can of course customize the colors of these as you see fit. And like I said before, they do include both 72 dpi as well as 300 dpi versions. So that's it for this pack, and if you like what you've seen thus far and you want to use all 15, just be sure to pick this pack up this week. So that's it for this week's free goods, and do remember they are free this week only. So if you saw something you might have use for, just head on down to the description of this video where I will place links to download each one of these 6 different free items. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please like and favorite, and if you want to see this video every week, please subscribe. This video is released every Monday till you know it's free this week on Creative Market. Thank you for watching.